It was one of the most notorious crimes in the history of the state of Ohio. 8 members of one family shot and killed in 4 different homes in one night. The Rhoden family virtually wiped out. The crime scenes spread out. The investigation massive. It was a crime that went unsolved for 2 years, but then became even more shocking. That's when investigators implicated not one suspect, not 2, but 4 suspects, all members of the same family, the Wagners. But then the big question, why would one family want to eliminate another family? What was the alleged motive? Tonight, we go in depth as we take a close look at the next live trial here on Court TV, the Pike County Massacre. Who is this Wagner family? Why would they want to kill the Rhodens? And how did investigators solve this murder mystery? I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. In the next hour, we are going to take you inside this story that will be a trial right here on your front row seat to justice. I want to begin, though, a little upbeat, just a little bit upbeat. I want to remind you about a song. A song I used to play a lot when I DJ'd. Anytime you DJ a wedding or some family event, you've got to throw on Sister Sledge, We Are Family. It's a song where sisters are celebrating one another and that bond they have as family members. And when you think about it, that bond is something to be celebrated. And it would always be celebrated with this song, obviously, right? You're getting out, you're dancing and singing about your family. And the story we're talking about tonight is about 2 families that share a bond, but for the 2 families, those bonds are 2 things that are completely different. Couldn't be more different. We begin with the Rhoden family, and what they share is absolute tragedy. Victims of murder, 8 of them. 8 members of the same family taken out. And not taken out like in one place. It was some sort of single crime scene mass shooting. No, this was planned and plotted, 4 different homes where these family members were slaughtered, absolutely slaughtered. And for this family, gone. And when this happened, think about the shock and confusion. Like, who takes out a whole family? And why would you do that? Let's get to the other side of the coin here, the Wagner family. And these are the allegations by the prosecution, is that this family eliminated the other family. And they did it first by taking a family vote. This is going to be our plan, our plot. We're a family. We do everything together. You know, just like, you know, you may sit down and have a meeting at the kitchen table. I think a lot of families do that. Hey, where do we want to go on vacation this year? Or, you know, what should we do? Should we buy a new TV? You know, things like that. Or where should we have the graduation party? You know? Or how about this? What do we want to have for dinner on Sunday? It's a special celebration. That wasn't this kind of meeting. According to prosecutors, a family meeting to take a vote about whether or not they were going to commit mass murder. This is sick, distorted, unreal. And now here we are tonight talking about it, and it's been years since the Pike County Massacre in Ohio. You know, it's a story that we've been waiting for a trial to happen, but a lot of things have happened in between. And it's somewhat complicated because the crime scenes and the investigation, the amount of time it took to put it all together, it's not going to be a quick trial. This isn't a trial you do in 3 days. I mean, you've really got to go through all of the forensic evidence and the other evidence that you have to tie it all together because of the nature of these allegations and the nature of this crimes. So for those of you not familiar with this story, and I know a lot of you are, Court TV legal correspondent Joy Lim-Nakrin has more for us tonight.
It was a crime that terrified a rural Ohio area. 8 members of one family all murdered in what would be dubbed the Pike County Massacre.
This is a horrible tragedy that has occurred here in Pike County. Each one of the victims appears to have been executed. Each one of the victims appears to be shot in the head.
The youngest of the victims, just 16 years old. Their bodies found in 4 separate homes spread across 3 different locations more than 20 miles apart. The complex crime scene suggested a coordinated attack, a mystery that prompted law enforcement to appeal to the public for clues.
I want to urge anyone, any citizens that has any information concerning anything involving this horrible act to contact the Pike County Sheriff's Office, where we have BCI agents there. They're following up on every tip that comes in.
The investigation required resources, staff, and a lot of patience. It was 2 years before charges were announced.
At the center of this case are members of one family whom we believe the evidence will show conspired together to kill these 8 people. 8 of their friends.
George Wagner IV, along with his brother Jake and his parents Angela and George III, were all charged in the mass shooting.
This is very much a family affair. All for one, one for all.
Prosecutors say it all stemmed from a dispute about custody and control over the daughter Jake Wagner had with 19-year-old Hannah Mae Rhoden. Hannah was one of the victims, along with her parents, 40-year-old Chris and 37-year-old Dana, plus her uncle, 44-year-old Kenneth, and cousin Gary, 38 years old. Hannah's brothers, 16-year-old Christopher Jr. and 20-year-old Clarence, as well as his fiancée, 20-year-old Hannah Gilly, were also killed. Hannah and Jake's child was spared. She, along with another child, were the only survivors in the massacre that claimed the lives of 8 of their relatives.
We believe that the Wagners conspired together. They studied the victims' habits and their routines. They knew the layouts of their homes. They knew where they slept.
As George Wagner IV stands trial, his mother Angela and younger brother Jake are expected to testify against him.
It's not anticipated that you will ever be released from prison. Do you understand?
I do, Your Honor.
Jake is turning state's evidence in exchange for life in prison without parole. But there was another component of the deal. Prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty for him and the other members of his family charged in the crime.
Ms. Wagner, does that sound like an agreement that you reached with the state of Ohio?
Yes, Your Honor.
Jake's mother, Angela, has also reached a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for her testimony, she will serve a term of 30 years.
She speaks vividly of recalling speaking to Jake and George and asking if they were sure that they wanted to go through with this.
But the family testimony could be a double-edged sword for the state. The defense expected to argue George Wagner IV did not shoot anyone the night in question, based on his brother Jake's own confession. Their father, George Wagner III, will also stand trial at a later date.
How are these relevant to the crimes for which Mr. Wagner has been indicted?
Residents of this rural Ohio community will be watching and waiting for justice.
So this hour, we're going to go into this case, and I think we have to start by trying to understand who these families are and the dynamics and the psychology behind what happened here, even before we get to the crime scene. So let's start by bringing in our guests. Joining me tonight in Lincoln, Nebraska, Washington Post contributor and assistant professor of journalism at the University of Nebraska's College of Journalism and Mass Communications. Chris Graves is with us, and she has written extensively and reported extensively on this story. And in Los Angeles, California, forensic psychiatrist, trial expert witness, and columnist of Inside the Criminal Mind, Dr. Carol Lieberman, also with us. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much. Chris, I want to begin with you. I just want to start first with the Rhoden family. What do we know about this family? Are there any family members left? And just describe a little bit about who they were and where they lived and what their lives were like.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, I'm glad this has finally sort of captured the hearts and minds of people as it has for people in Ohio. The Rhodens were and are a very close-knit family who live in southern Ohio, in the foothills of Appalachia, very close. Killed in April 2016 were Chris Rhoden, Dana Manley Rhoden. They were husband and wife. They had been estranged, but they were reconciling their marriage. Their oldest son, Frankie Rhoden, their daughter, Hannah Mae Rhoden, and their youngest son, Chris Rhoden Jr., who was 16, were also killed, as was Chris Rhoden's brother, Kenneth Rhoden, and Chris Rhoden's cousin, Gary Rhoden. To understand this story is to, as you alluded to in your open, it's really a story about family and loss and love and tragedy. And there are obviously it's an extensive family, as I said. There are many survivors still, brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews who still live in the area, Pike County, Scioto County, and other areas, and also across the river in Kentucky.
Dr. Carol Lieberman, how about a devastating loss like that to a family? Now, there were 2 children that were spared here that are going to grow up. To me, that is the ultimate tragedy in all of this, and how you get them to understand and deal with this incredible loss. But even for the extended family, this is, 8 people gone.
Yes, this is a modern day Hatfields versus McCoys. And, it's going to be especially difficult this all started because of a custody dispute. And it's very unusual. A lot of the family dynamics are very unusual in this family. They are unusually close. They homeschooled together. They, they shared all their money. They did lots of things. It was kind of incestuous, if not sexually, then certainly psychologically. And so when the woman, Jake's girlfriend, had a baby and then wouldn't share custody or give him custody, the whole family, all for one and one for all and so on. But at the same time, the opposite is true in the sense that Jake he's sparing his family by having the plea deal, or he hopes to, in any case, spare them from the death penalty, but he's also going to be testifying against them. So we have this incredibly unusual closeness, and we have an incredibly unusual, betrayal in a sense.
Chris, who was there someone who was the leader of the Wagner family, the ones accused of taking out the Rhoden family?
That is yet to be seen as a fact. I will tell you, throughout whatever it is, 6.5 years of reporting on this case, I've talked with Jake, I've talked with Angela repeatedly in the beginning days, and I guess a year or two forward before they were arrested and indicted. I think, as the prosecutor outlined, it was very much a very insular family. The dynamics were, again, as a prosecutor said in motions, all for one and one for all. I certainly think there were people who wanted things done, and perhaps there was someone leading that charge. I would like to know, just as much as everybody, who that was. I certainly have some thoughts about that, but I don't know them to be fact at this time.
Sure.
If that's fair.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. And for those of us who haven't been to this part of Ohio, can you describe the area and sort of the vibe and the feel for where all this is taking place, and how that may or may not impact family dynamics?
Yeah. I've always said that this story again, is one of family, but it would be a completely different story if it did not happen in southern Ohio and the foothills of Appalachia. And to understand this story, I think, is really to try to spend an inordinate amount of time understanding the culture of this area. The rub here is that it is beautiful. It is breathtakingly beautiful. You know, it's, again, the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, so it's hilly. It is bounded by waterways and farmland. It is also, at the same time, a complicated place. It's a place where the economy is not great, where industry has pulled out. There was an atomic energy plant, it's called the A plant, in the area that pulled out and took with it hundreds of jobs. That has been devastating to this area. It is largely, not completely, but poor, undereducated. You know, many of the people there are some people, I think it's 10% of the population in Pike County still live with no running water and those things.
Wow.
That does not, however, and I want to be clear, that does not mean that the people here are not wonderful and caring and all of those things, right? Things can be both things. They can be undereducated and poor and love their families just like people all over the United States. And I feel pretty fierce about that because I think people have a distorted reality of what
they'll have a cliche in their
Appalachia
mind.
looks like.
They'll have a stereotype or cliche in their mind. And
yeah, exactly. And I've spent, probably hundreds of hours there. I've lived in the area, tried to get to know the folks as much as possible. I will also say there's an inordinate amount of distrust, as you might imagine.
Distrust of
just
who?
Because so many, you know, most everybody, you know, reporters, certainly, government, police, institutions, because I think, if you were to ask my opinion, I would think it's largely because they've seen so much leave that area. So many people leave them. So when people leave an area, I think it's pretty common that, you know, you pull together. You rely on the people who you trust and you love, and that's family on both sides, the Wagners and the Rhodens, and the Gillies and the Manleys. I want to make sure that we also say there are other families involved here.
Absolutely.
As well.
All right, Chris Graves, Dr. Carol Lieberman staying with us. When we come back, we're going to focus in now on the case, on the alleged motive, the friction between these two families. Where did it come from? That's coming up next, plus coming up in the next hour. In Louisville, Kentucky, finally criminal charges in the shooting death of Breonna Taylor. Not against the officers who were executing the warrant and shot her, but the detectives who got the warrant. Tonight, a closer look at the evidence. Did investigators lie to get a judge to okay the raid on Breonna's apartment?
We allege that the defendants knew their actions in falsifying the affidavit could create a dangerous situation, and we allege these unlawful acts resulted in Ms. Taylor's death.
For technology.
Are you suggesting that then the arrival at the premises there on the evening of the death was expected?
Chris Sr. expected to see Billy Wagner that night. He did not know that Jake and George were present because they were hidden.
There was the prosecutor outlining part of their theory of the case here, that the Wagner family planned and plotted to wipe out and murder the Rhoden family. Unbelievable case out of Pike County, Ohio. Getting ready for a trial here on Court TV. Let me give you an idea of some of the allegations of the alleged criminal enterprise. And you usually hear that when you're talking about a mob case. But here again, you're talking about a family. What does the mob call themselves? They call themselves the family, right? So here's some of the alleged acts of this criminal enterprise. Multiple instances of arson of various properties of their own for financial gain. multiple instances of theft by the defendant and his family, asking and or ordering potential witnesses against them not to speak to investigators and or not appear pursuant to subpoena and or hiring attorneys for witnesses. This is like Mob 101, folks. Making a plan that if not all of them were arrested, how the ones who were not arrested would break the others out of jail. The defendant and his co-defendants functioning as one unit at all times, demonstrated by factors including residing together in a very insular manner their entire lives, even while married as adults, homeschooling their children, working together at all times, family meetings, voting on all affairs, shared financial resources. All those things at the end, you know, if you're not plotting murders, that's like great stuff. Families that stick together. But when you're sticking together and allegedly planning the murder and the execution of another family, that's where you run into a little bit of trouble here. All right, let me bring in our guest, still with us, Washington Post contributor, assistant professor of journalism, Chris Graves, forensic psychologist, Dr. Carol Lieberman, and joining us now in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, family law attorney Jennifer Brandt. Jennifer Brandt, let me ask you first. You're in the middle of this battle all the time, custody battles. Have you ever seen one to this level where an entire family plans and plots the murder of the other family?
No, Vinnie, this is a very unique case, but you can understand how, in a misguided way, what they were thinking. They were thinking that if they wiped out the entire Rhoden family, there would be no one left to battle them for custody of this child. And so the child by default would end up with the Wagner family. What they didn't consider is being caught, you know, and the child not having any family really to live with, or having to live with distant relatives rather than a parent or a grandparent. So, the reasoning behind it, not necessarily the right reasoning, but they were in their own misguided way, I think, just trying to guarantee that they would get custody of this child. It came to that level. And people do get very heated over custody battles. It's probably the hardest thing that I deal with in my practice, for sure, the most emotional area of my practice. But it never, I've never seen it go to this extreme or this extent. People may threaten or say they'd like, the other person to be gone or not have the other parent around, but they don't typically act on it like this family did.
And Dr. Carol Lieberman, I always say this, the most dangerous courtroom in any courthouse is the family courtroom. That's right. That's where, as Jennifer Brandt is explaining, the emotions can just go out of control.
Yes. When I work as an expert witness in divorce and custody cases, it is incredibly, people get so emotional about it. It's not, it's not like any criminal kind of case. It's more emotional because it's like part of you that you're fighting for, that you want to keep. But usually it's an individual, the mother or the father who is that emotional and will go to all kinds of lengths. This is a family. And what's interesting is there were 2 events that really precipitated what happened. One was when the mother, Hannah, wrote on Facebook that I'm not going to sign anything giving you custody, you're going to have to kill me first. And not to say that that was the first time that the Wagner family ever thought of that, but still that precipitated it. And then the next event was when Hannah had her baby with another man who was only 4 days old. When they invaded and killed the Rhodens, her baby was only 4 days old and she was lying with the mother. I mean, what a scene. Can you imagine the heartlessness to be able to shoot the mother when she's cuddling with her baby? But anyhow, I think it was that date, the fact that that baby came, that then finally precipitated the ultimate act.
Chris Graves, Washington Post contributor, professor of journalism, covering this story for years. What was going on at the time in this battle? Were things happening in the courtroom, or was it just 2 families who couldn't agree? What was happening?
Yeah, there was no paperwork filed in court. They had, it depends on what side you believe, as these things always is always the case. At the time, I spoke with Jake and Angela, I guess it was in 2016, and then later before they were arrested, about late 2016, early 2017, he vehemently denied that there was a custody battle. He said, as did Angela, that they had a great working relationship, shared custody. There was no battle at all. That, in fact, he had been meeting with an attorney to formalize their working arrangement. And that's why he was going to attorney. We now know differently in court. But again, hindsight's, 2020, I didn't know that when I was talking to him, obviously, in 2016 and early 2017. But that was their story. Now, there were other people I interviewed, again, back in 2016, 2017, who said there had been arguments with Hannah, and in fact with Billy Wagner, the dad, and Chris Rhoden Sr., the dad, so the two patriarchs of the family, if you will, about custody. I'm trying to be really simple because it gets really complicated.
I know it gets very complicated, and it'll play out inside the courtroom.
Yeah.
But Chris, did the family have any history with other children, like sort of getting custody of the children if both parents weren't together?
Yeah, they sure did. George Wagner, the man who is going to trial on Monday, was married to a woman, had a son with her. They divorced. As part of those divorce agreements, she relinquished custody of that child. She did so under duress. Which, again, before the Wagners were indicted, there were rumors about her being paid off, that there was a payment made, all of those sorts of things. As was mentioned, the Facebook message that Hannah was, it was a private Facebook message. Angela Wagner allegedly hacked into the account and was watching the accounts of multiple people during this time. That Facebook message actually was to the mother of George Wagner's ex-wife, talking about they were doing the same thing to her daughter, and that was the Facebook message where Hannah Mae said that that'll never happen. They're going to have to kill me, or something to that effect, over my dead body. So a flippant remark, many of us say, certainly seems to have set some things in motion, or at least solidified it. It seems like that's where it all started.
Jennifer Brandt, when you have a situation where the parents are not together and there's no paperwork and there's no official agreement, things can get a little dicey. Sometimes, though, can people work it out and say, okay, we don't need Jennifer Brandt or any lawyer or judge, we'll just figure it out ourselves? Or is that pretty rare?
They always need me, Vinnie, but no. It actually, some people are able to work things out and are able to get along fabulously. And even though they're not together as a couple, they can put aside their differences and look at the best interest of the child and raise the child accordingly and don't need a custody order. It's not common. Most people do need a custody order at some point or another, at least to set some ground rules and just to make sure kind of people know, who has time with the child and when. But, here it just was a bit of chaos, it seems. And these other women who I think are going to testify for the prosecution, George Wagner's first wife, it sounds like there was a lot of intimidation, a lot of bullying. And if you think about a mother relinquishing custody of a child, you can imagine there might be extreme bullying for someone to just say they're going to give up rights to a child. That doesn't usually happen, mother or father. Both parents usually want to be involved with raising their children. So
yeah, and shared custody, is not unusual these days. Someone will be primary, but it's very common. Jennifer Jennifer Brand, appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you so much. Chris Graves, Dr. Carol Lieberman staying with us. When we come back, we're going to turn the conversation to the crime scenes, the investigation. How did they put this case together? And perhaps a little preview of what you may see inside the courtroom next.
Actively working 4 crime scenes at this time. I've got assistance by not only my staff with the Attorney General's office, but also the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, Ross County Sheriff's Office, the Adams County Sheriff's Office. Here today also is the Pike County Prosecutor's Office, Pike County Children's Services, and of course the Pike County Coroner. At this time, I can confirm that we have 8 bodies in this county. All were adults except for 1 male juvenile.
The Pike County Massacre, 4 crime scenes, 8 bodies. Let me show you where all of this took place. We begin 4077 Union Hill Road. Chris Rhoden Sr. shot 9 times in his trailer, and his cousin, Gary Rhoden, who was there, was shot 3 times in the head. Travel 0.2 miles to the next crime scene at 4199 Union Hill Road. There you have Clarence Frankie Rhoden, who was shot twice in the head, laying in bed next to his fiancée, Hannah Hazel Gilley, who was shot 5 times in the head. Their baby was in bed and unharmed, and another child in the home unharmed. Travel again 1.5 miles to the next crime scene, 3122 Union Hill Road. Dana Manley Rhoden, shot 5 times in the head. Hannah Mae Rhoden, shot twice in the face. Christopher Chris Rhoden Jr., just 16 years old, shot 4 times, including twice in the head. And we go 7.5 miles to the next location, 799 Left Fork Road, where Kenneth Rhoden shot once in the right eye. Evil, absolute evil. Still with us, Washington Post contributor Chris Graves, forensic psychiatrist Dr. Carol Lieberman, and joining us now in Salt Lake City, Utah, retired police commander, host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King. Mike, your thoughts about what happened? 4 crime scenes, 8 bodies, this investigation, and putting all of these pieces together.
I think we're going to see the prosecution lay this thing out. And as we look at the public information that's been available, I'm starting to create a picture in my mind. I mean, it is clear that there was a great deal of planning in this homicide and mass shooting, or in reality, spree shooting, where he moved from one, or this group moved from one victim to the next. I think it's really going to be interesting to see the information that the prosecution exposes in the trial about the preparation that went into this thing, the clothing that was purchased beforehand and used in the homicides, the ammunition, the components to build silencer devices for the weapons, the practicing that went on. And I say that, Vinnie, because we know that law enforcement was out cutting pieces of tree apart, taking bullet fragments where they were practicing on the properties that the suspect family owns. They are collecting that information so that they can analyze those bullet fragments against bullet fragments recovered at the crime scenes and in the bodies. And that's going to be really important. I think it's interesting to learn that the suspects in this case apparently purchased equipment to capture the brass as it ejects from the weapon that's being fired, to keep that from being found at the crime scene. And was it that effective? Did they in fact find some brass. So that's something I'm really looking forward to see. But all of that gives us this indication of an incredible amount of pre-planning, premeditation. We know that there were precipitating things that happened with the first child and the relationship falling apart. The second child, where for some reason Wagner wanted that child put in his name and Hannah refused to do that. And then, of course, whether or not the Facebook ad kind of forces the family's hand, but we can see this dynamic happening in the family in every other decision they're making. And was it all part of this conspiratory act? And I think we're going to see that unfold. And then, holy cow, the evidence at the crime scene, thousands and thousands of pieces of evidence that were collected in those 4 separate crime scenes. And will it methodically show us how they moved from each location to the next and systematically executed those victims? Because that's what it appears to happen. And why on earth were some shot multiple times, others shot only in certain regions of the body and other places? And the behavior that we're going to learn about here and the relationships with each victim and the suspect family are going to tell us a lot about those bullet wounds. I think this whole thing is going to really paint a picture behaviorally that shows not only premeditation, if everything we're reading is accurate, but it's going to show what the mindset was and how in their wacky minds they thought they were going to get away with this.
Chris Graves, can you give us some idea of the nature, the size of this investigation, and how they were able to put the pieces together?
Absolutely. You know, at the very beginning, the first day, the state of Ohio, Pike County is a small county. You know, you saw the sheriff Charlie Reeder, but initially they called in the state Ohio Attorney General, who was Mike DeWine, his office. I think the first several weeks there were about 90 to 100 investigators from the state, everybody from forensic crime scene investigators to blood spatter experts to folks who were doing a forensic analysis on phones and computers and cameras and crime scene investigations. I did a story. I went to the Ohio Crime Lab and they were processing, I didn't see it, of course, but processing hundreds and thousands of pieces of evidence, and that went on, as I recall, for months on end. Again, the search at the Wagners' home was multiple, the Wagners' former home in Peebles. I spoke with the current owner, and he shed light on how many times investigators throughout, up until just truthfully, like less than a year ago, continued to come back to that farmhouse and confiscate evidence, looking for guns. It is now clear through some motions, hearings, that it appears that Jake, in working with prosecutors and investigators, led authorities to the guns involved. Where they found those, I don't know. I'm curious to find that out. But yeah, the magnitude of this it's huge. I was told there were somewhere between 10 and 12 terabytes of discovery, which is phenomenal. It is for sure the largest, most costly, most complicated investigation. And if you can think about this, you have essentially 4 different crime scenes. It's one event, if you will, one horrible, horrific event, but 4 different crime scenes that have to be processed. Another complicating factor, and I'm not trying to get into the weeds, but it's just something really surreal and odd about this case, is they moved all of the trailers. I will be curious if that will come up, if the defense will discuss chain of evidence issues. I mean, they physically towed the trailers, all 4 of them, 3 trailers and a camper, and those have been in storage.
Wow. Wow. All right. Our guests are staying with us. We're going to continue talking about this story. Trial starts Monday. In the meantime, coming up next hour. In Delaware, Ohio, Matthew Moore is accused of murdering his wife and staging it to look like a suicide. Tonight, all the evidence is in, but is there enough to convict?
A I've never had a harder closing argument than this, because honestly, in most, I've got evidence to attack. This case is totally speculation.
A senseless tragedy in small-town America.
This was a pre-planned execution.
It was a feud between families that ended with multiple murders.
Came in like thieves in the night and took 8 lives.
George Wagner faces murder charges in connection with the killing.
Wagner's brother and parents also charged.
It's very much a family affair. All for one for all.
It's a chilling story. It will be an intense trial.
The Ohio Family Massacre Trial. Live coverage starting Monday morning on Court TV.
At birdies.com.
Today we have the answer. Members of one family conspired, planned, carried out, and then allegedly covered up their violent act to wipe out members of another family. They did this quickly, coldly, calmly, and very carefully, but not carefully enough. They left traces. They left a trail. The parts to build a silencer, the forged documents, the cameras, cell phones, all that they tampered with, and the lies, all the lies they told us.
And of those 4 family members, 2 have taken deals now, will testify against other family members, and the first trial begins Monday right here on Court TV. Still with us, Chris Graves, Dr. Carol Lieberman, Mike King, and I want to get your final thoughts tonight as we prepare for this massive trial to begin. And I'll start with you, Dr. Carol Lieberman.
Well, obviously this has been an incredibly traumatic event, not just for the families involved, but for the town and for all of Ohio, really. And people are going to be re-traumatized by, going through all of these inhumane acts again. But it's most traumatic for the 2 little children, the daughter that was born between Jake and Hannah, and the daughter of Hannah and some other man, because they will always blame themselves. They're going to feel guilty. They're going to feel it's because of them that one family is dead and that the other family is in jail. Now, of course, it's not their fault, but it's going to be very hard for them to grow up, not only with the trauma, but with these feelings of guilt and self-blame.
Chris Graves?
Yeah, I would echo that. This is a case to be really to get wrapped up in the salacious details and the oddities of this and the diabolical schemes and schema and all of those things. But at the very end, this is, again, a story of family. And I think keeping in mind the victims and the survivors left behind, the children, certainly, and all of the family members who are reliving this every single day.
Mike King, host of Profiling Evil. I keep saying that because I think of this story. It is evil.
Yeah, I mean, this thing is going to boil down to the testimony of 2 participants in the planning, the execution, and then trying to get away with this thing. And that's going to be really hard to overcome. This family that somehow slays together didn't stay together at the end, and that's going to pay really big dividends for the prosecution, I believe.
I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. This hour has been very informative, very important, as again here at Court TV we get ready for our coverage of this case. Chris Graves, Washington Post contributor, Associate Professor of Journalism. Please read all the articles she's written on this amazing stuff. Dr. Carol Lieberman, always great to have you here. And Mike King, make sure you listen to the Profiling Evil podcast. Thank you again. We'll see you very, very soon. I hope you all come back.